All right, welcome back, 7th and 8th grade. We have our sniglet of the week. This is, see if I can pronounce it the way the book tells me to. Testapyrate. There's a couple ways we could pronounce it. One is testapyrate. Testapyrate. The two words together here are test and some form of respirate, like breathing. It is a verb to emit a big gush of air from one's lungs after turning in an exam, like. So you could also pronounce it similar to desperate too if you want. Testapyrate, desperate, or testapyrate, respirate, testapyrate. You'd have to practice that one. Anyway, I thought that was a good one. Some of you may have already done that this year. The Shakespeare quote I chose is from Macbeth, the be-all and the end-all. We use that phrase today, the be-all, end-all, the ultimate, the GOAT, as a lot of people say. You can just imagine in 200 years, someone unearths a text from a teenager and it says, "He's the GOAT." And a literature teacher has to stand up and say, "Well, let me tell you what GOAT means. This does not mean an animal with horns." And she has to explain that it means the greatest of all time. Well, that's similar to Macbeth. We have the be-all, end-all. The be-all and the end-all. We're not really sure what it originally meant, but Shakespeare said it in such a way that something that can be all and end all must be the ultimate, the GOAT. So next time someone says GOAT, you can impress them with your Shakespeare and say he's the be-all, end-all. And the verse I chose for today is not a proverb, it's a psalm. Psalm 19:14 says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer." I think it's important to remember that all of our words and our thoughts are always on display for the Lord. He can see it all, He can hear it all, and our ultimate goal should be to please Him, to make these things acceptable to Him. Even when we think no one's around or no one cares or no one's watching, that's when we need to remember that God sees and God hears. So the words and the meditation, the thoughts. All right, this is actually going to be a pretty short video, but your assignment will be no less short than last week. But we're still talking about point of view. But as I hinted at last week, we are doing another perspective. So this week, what I want you to do, well, let's first talk about point of view. Do a quick review. There's different points of view when you write, and it's important to choose a point of view and to stick with it. Otherwise, your writing can be very confusing. You would really be concerned with point of view when writing a couple of different genres. You would be concerned with point of view if you're writing fiction, a story, a made-up story. If you're writing a historical account, you would also want to make sure that your point of view is consistent. You don't want to bounce around. You either write it from the first-person perspective or a third-person perspective. And then you have to know who is the person you're representing in your perspective. You need to know whether your perspective is limited, or another term we use. We also use this to talk about God. It's an omniscient perspective. When we talk about God, omniscient means all, omni, and shunt comes from the root word that has to do with science, or knowledge. and that means knowing, all knowing. So when you have an all-knowing perspective, you're writing from the perspective that you know the whole story. So you know people's thoughts, even if they don't say it. You know people's motives. And so, but that's not what we're going for here. We are going for a third person, limited perspective. So I want you to take the same exact story that you chose to write about last week. You still will probably use first person pronouns and first person point of view, but you're picking somebody in your story from last week that was an observer, and you're writing from their perspective. So here's my son did a story about how he rode on the roller coaster. Okay, there's this roller coaster. And in his story, there was someone who sat next to him that he had a conversation with. But there was also some friends that he came with to go on these roller coasters. So this week, what he's doing, so last week he was himself. This week, he is going to pick one of these people. I'm not sure who he's going to pick, but we're just going to pretend he's going to pick this guy. So now he's going to tell the same story, but now this is going to be this person who's talking, but he's still telling the same story about this guy. So you're going to have to rethink all of your pronouns, first, second, or third pronoun, and you're going to have to think through, you want to write it from this person's vantage point. So you're going to pick someone from your story that would have been a witness, and you're going to tell the story again from his or her vantage point. Now, we do this naturally when we're sitting around the table with friends. Maybe you tell a story about yourself, and then you go home to your parents and you say, Mom, or maybe you sit there and you hear someone else tell an account of something funny that happened to them. Then you go home and you tell your mom that same story. It'd be like that person telling the story and then you telling the story. So here's your homework assignment. You're going to use first person pronouns as the teller of the story when you refer to yourself, the witness. And you'll use third person pronouns when referring to the main actor of the story, who this time is not you. Do not include details that you would not be able to observe from your vantage point. So last week we talked about including details like your motives or your thoughts or your emotions, what you were thinking or feeling during this time. You can't share that in this version. You can share observations. And if you want to look back at last week's video, I gave you an illustration of that, where maybe one person talks about how they walked into a room and they were nervous. This week, you're going to observe it. She was, clinging to her hands were gripping her purse. Her eyes were scanning the room. So you can share what you observe, but you can't say she was nervous because you just don't know. All right, so it's more of a show and tell than it is a expression of her thoughts and her feelings. So like last week, make sure your story has a heading and make sure it includes a title. Now, I realized last week that I probably need to be a little more specific, especially with this group, because you guys, your paper should look professional. So if this is your paper, I would like for you to have your name here, the date here, and then the assignment, which we're going to call this assignment. I guess I didn't give you a title. We're going to say point of view paragraph, or I'll call it story. And we're going to call this number 2. Okay, so the other one was number 1. So that would be right here. You'd say point of view paper number 2. And then your title would be here. So if you're writing about roller coasters, it would say something like so-and-so's roller coaster ride, or you can get creative, make a better title than I can. And that would be in the middle of your paper, like a title. And then you proceed to type here. Okay, so this heading goes in the top left-hand corner, and your title goes in the middle. If you are not sure how to do that, you can ask a parent, you can Google it, but this would be left side aligned, and this would be centered, okay? There are shortcuts to do that on your computer. It might be a good time to learn. And so I would like it in 12-point font unless otherwise instructed by your parent or teacher, and it needs to be turned in on time. So this assignment will be the same number of points as last week's assignment, but you also need to turn in a clean copy of last week's assignment. So go ahead and get that from your parent or teacher with the corrections they marked, and you need to turn in a clean copy. So you're going to have 7 points for this one. And for this one, you'll have as many points as they marked. So if they marked 20 things and you correct and clean up 20 things, you will get a 20 out of 20. Okay? Now, before I go, I'm going to do a quick review of your pronouns just so you're ready. I'll sing my little song. Oh, I, you, it, he, she, we, you, they. Pronouns, subjective pronouns. Oh, me, you, it, him, her, us, you, them. Objective pronouns. I changed it a little, and it's super low. And I think at one point I did a possessive verse, but I'll keep going. Say them every day, and that's a very good way to learn the words that replace a noun. Say them every day. And then I think I did at one point. Oh, my, mine, your, yours, his, hers, theirs, its, pronouns, pronouns. Oh, our, ours, your, yours, his, hers, theirs, its, pronouns, possessive pronouns. And then you sing, say them every day. That's a very good way to learn the words that replace a noun. Say them every day. So there you go. Use the correct pronouns when you write this paper for a good grade. All right. See you next week.